Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just get myself sorted. Due to the joys of modern technology, I nearly wasn't here because my diary didn't sync properly and I was nearly an hour late. So great to see you. Let me just check I'm sorted here. So I'm going to talk today about the trends we see in the advertising industry, particularly digital, across Europe, and how we see some of the key issues and opportunities. And I'm going to start by looking at some of the numbers. I'll skip through these fairly quickly, but our forecast, we've just been doing our annual forecast for the wider media market globally. And I wanted to share some of the numbers that we're just coming up with today for this year and for next year. And to start with, if we just look at the overall European digital market, on this chart you can see the trend in European advertising from 2007 through to 2020. The red line's total advertising across Europe, and the blue line is digital. And you can see that digital ad spend continues to grow faster than total advertising. And this year we're forecasting 54 billion euros of investment across Europe, which broadly matches the IAB Europe's numbers, as far as I know. And on the next chart here, you can see how digital is taking more share. Again, digital is in blue, and this shows the growth rates, year-on-year growth rates. So digital has seen higher growth than total advertising over the whole period, and we're looking at growth in digital advertising of 9.5% for this year and 7.6% for next year. And if you look at that by some of the major digital markets across the region, you won't see everyone here, but you can see there's consistent growth everywhere. And generally, it's very healthy. Probably I'd pick out that Germany is notable for how slowly it's growing. I think 2018 was dominated by the implementation of GDPR, which caused quite a reduction from what we were projecting originally. And just as a matter of interest, as we are here in Warsaw, in Poland, I should say that we're forecasting this year digital growth at about 10%. And next year, around 7%. Now, when we look at what's going on in the advertising market, we tend to look more at personal consumption expenditure in different countries as a better metric than GDP. We think it gives a better feel for the economic health of a market. And here you can see personal consumption expenditure data. You can see the changing consumer trends and how the trend has been improving more recently. There's been a rebound in consumer spending globally. And although we're still weaker in Europe than the US, it's still a better story. So that's just a bit of the context, I guess, of how we see the overall market trends at the moment. But then if we look more at spending by advertisers, what this chart shows is that advertising spend has reduced as a percentage of advertisers' revenues. This is data from 16 of the largest, I'll call them, I don't like using the word, traditional marketers. Advertising spend as a percentage of their business revenues. The blue line is the average, the red is a median. You can see both lines are falling over time, even if the median stayed higher for longer. So I think the trend is clear. Traditional marketers are investing less relative to the size of their business. And that's happened consistently over a period of time. Got another chart here I don't really like. You probably don't know what digital dominant endemics actually means, but that's the title we've given to this for a summary of investment by companies like Netflix, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Uber, who are now investing more and more in advertising themselves as marketers themselves. This again shows how much they're spending on advertising as a percentage of their business revenues. And you can see the percentage was increasing until 2014-15, and since then it's been decreasing. But I guess, unlike the traditional marketers that we saw on the previous page, the revenues of these companies are growing really fast overall. So I guess it's understandable that the percentage they invest in advertising comes down as the revenues increase at that rate. The absolute spending by these companies is really significant now, and we think it's driving quite a lot of the global growth in advertising and obviously in digital advertising. They're that material. There's a lot of talk in our sector, in marketing, about direct-to-consumer brands. And I think people assume that a lot of growth in digital advertising is from those kind of brands. Although some of these brands have become very real competitors for many of the traditional players and many of our clients, the absolute amount they're investing in advertising at a global or international level is not really as significant as the digital players that I just talked about on the previous chart. So we think this area actually isn't having as big an impact, certainly internationally, as one might think. So that's probably enough on numbers and stuff for now. I just wanted to talk about some of the kind of perhaps challenges and opportunities that we see internationally, in particular across Europe. And firstly, GDPR and the use of consumer data in advertising. I mean, it's now, 1 year into its existence. Assessing the long-term impact of GDPR with much precision is pretty difficult, because the way in which it will ultimately be implemented across the region is going to evolve as specific interpretations of the law are currently applied differently within individual countries. We believe that'll change and a single, more unified standard will ultimately prevail. But whatever its shape, the path forward on the primacy of consumer privacy and tighter restrictions on the use of consumer data in digital advertising seems assured now. And I think many global marketers who are looking for a template to sort of baseline against their data management operations may use GDPR, assuming it's ultimately the most restrictive standard, as their starting point for organizing their workflows outside of Europe as well. So it's really a kind of benchmark we see beyond the borders of Europe. Tighter rules around the use of data has definitely created some winners and some losers in terms of where spending goes. But at an overall aggregate level, we think it's had a modest impact so far. You've seen the growth numbers. Of course, there were clearly some businesses who've struggled in GDPR's wake. Many ad tech companies dependent on third-party data face challenges, and others have exited Europe entirely. Marketers have generally shifted their reliance towards their own first-party data, or to data which belong directly to publishers or platforms, rather than third parties who didn't have clear chains of consent. The next area I want to talk about is competition and competition policy. And again, compared with other parts of the world, Europe has led the way in challenging some of the bigger technology companies with increasingly meaningful attempts to constrain their behaviors. Financial fines have so far been the most tangible actions taken by European regulators, and they've become a cost of doing business for some of those companies. But they also appear likely to go further. The frequency and the scale of the fines may at least partially alter the corporate behavior and probably make it more likely than would otherwise be the case that startups can compete in each of these areas. And we think there'll be more significant efforts to follow. There's a drive in the UK to cause the Competition and Markets Authority to launch a formal study into digital advertising, and the German Cartel Office are already looking at various aspects of the business too. It's really hard to know the consequences on advertising of these different initiatives. But clearly a more fragmented group of sellers of digital advertising would provide advertisers with more choice and potentially with improved negotiating leverage and advantageous pricing. On the other hand, that kind of fragmentation can make it harder to standardize certain elements of an advertiser's campaigns and may make it harder to optimize across platforms as well as can happen within them. Just going to quickly talk about copyright, because there was a vote in March approving a new copyright directive, as I'm sure you know. So Europe's also setting a new standard in copyright law by making internet platforms liable for violations if they distribute unlicensed content uploaded by users. That covers news articles beyond snippets. Member states have 2 years to implement this directive in their countries. And to the extent that until now content creators have not been given as much protection of their intellectual property as might reasonably be expected, efforts to update those copyright laws to reflect modern realities are generally a good thing. They can be designed with past concepts in mind, but lagging the introduction of new technologies. No doubt platforms who will be subject to the law will use filters to prevent inappropriate sharing in some instances, but may also begin to license content in others. This could cause platforms to incur costs they may wish to avoid, but it would at least reward content creators. And if they don't, will there be any commercial impact? Well, I think, as I said earlier, there likely won't be much beyond modest shifts across individual platforms and media owners. Unless there were a radical impact on consumption trends, budgets are not likely going to shift by much, even if some consumers access content less often. At a global level, again, to the extent elements of the new directive on copyright prove to have a clear negative or positive impact, it will at least go a long way towards influencing how policymakers in other parts of the world assess changes there. Again, Europe taking the lead. And I just wanted to pick up on one other area which is obviously developing incredibly fast, which is e-commerce, and talk in particular about how we see the developments here in Europe a bit compared to the US. If I start by talking about the grocery area. Grocery delivery landscape in Europe is significantly more advanced than the States. Players like Ocado, for example, have really solid operations which allow them to deliver fresh and frozen food and a complete offering to consumers. Amazon won't have as much of a clean slate to start from. Indeed, it may be why they're partnering with traditional grocers in quite a few markets, like Morrison's in the UK, Monoprix in France. They also have a more compelling fresh frozen offering and a reputation for very strong private labels. Also, cross-border buying trends will force marketers to collaborate within the European region. Just imagine this situation now. Imagine that a brand has a French operation. They do a deal with Amazon France, who give them great terms, while the same brand's German operation doesn't get the same terms with Amazon Germany. If Amazon can fulfill an order cheaper or faster or more profitably by moving the French stock across borders and sending it to a consumer in Düsseldorf, they'll do that. So now take it further. If the brand teams of that company in France and Germany haven't coordinated with each other, they could end up competing for the same consumer and driving down prices. This is something that marketers will need to manage carefully and is clearly a very real issue in Europe and not at all in the States. And then there's click and collect, or what is also called in some places BOPIS, bought online, picked up in store. There's a significantly higher prevalence of click and collect in Europe compared with the US, especially in markets like France and Belgium. Click and collect is the dominant model of e-commerce, especially in grocery, so a very different proposition. In the US, it's still a bit of a new thing. The drive model, as it's called, is quite dominant. There are loads of reasons why it's the case. And the whole concept that e-commerce means shipped goods is not quite as true, as there are lots of ways, other ways, in which deliveries can happen. In Belgium, Wink delivers to storage lockers in parking lots. In Germany, there's now a partnership between DHL and Audi where they'll deliver packages to your car's boot. And we don't see that happening as much in the States. And I want to look at things now a bit from a brand's perspective. We obviously act on behalf of brands. And with all of these issues and opportunities going on, brands need to make judgments about where they want to draw the line. What are their priorities strategically? What's their appetite for risk compared with the potential reward? How much value do they place on trust and transparency in the supply chain? Data is not always accessible, and transparency is not always assured across platforms and channels. And brand safety standards are very different across channels and platforms. We've seen many incidents of brand safety involving all sorts of inappropriate or offensive content. GroupM and our clients are deeply engaged in the practice and the process of brand safety. Not only are our clients concerned about brand safety conceptually, each has a specific, legitimate perspective on the issues and a responsibility in the space. One key reality is that brand safety is not an absolute deterministic science. Some clients are focused on the financial risks of paying for invalid inventory. Others are willing to risk some exposure to brand safety incidents in the pursuit of performance and ROI. They have different appetites, but all of our clients are focused on respecting consumer privacy and improving user experience to preserve the ad-supported content ecosystem that provides the connection between brands and prospects. Even if each client, and in some cases even each brand within a client's business, has a different view of risk. And the GroupM brand safety risk assessment is designed to help our agencies and our clients determine a balance of tolerance versus tactics to guide media planning and buying decisions across the digital ecosystem. As we consult with clients on the merits and implications of a proactive brand safety approach, it's important to remember that in recent years we've seen the pendulum swing towards brand protection at almost any cost. However, these extremes are frequently no longer warranted or appropriate, as new targeting and verification capabilities and publisher and platform responsiveness have improved our ability to navigate, whether it's in programmatic, paid social, paid search, or influencer environments, while at the same time minimizing risk. So brand safety should not be the enemy of performance, and we can tailor individual client or brand programs to deliver KPIs while aligning risk exposure with that particular client's sense of the acceptable brand risk. Still, a well-conceived and brand-appropriate risk assessment can help determine the value of trading off some of the price and scale advantage in exchange for the quality-oriented advantages of improved customer experience, human viewable exposure, quality of inventory, reduced contextual incidents, etc. Weighing up the risks and reward across campaigns is a good practice also beyond brand safety. The choices of channel, publisher, or platform are varied across an ad campaign. And depending on the required outcome, it's important to remember that there is always an alternative available. This is where the role of a good agency is crucial. I would say that, wouldn't I? But it's really crucial to help provide advertisers with all the information to weigh up such decisions. So in summary, the key trends. We know that Silicon Valley may be the heart of the digital advertising industry, but it's Europe which appears to be driving the path forward for the industry, at least with respect to the manner in which data is used by sellers of digital advertising, the scale at which those sellers will be allowed to operate, as well as the legal status of some of the content which runs on the largest platforms. We do expect ongoing efforts from regulators and governments within Europe to continue to shape the industry going forward. And those efforts will impact how advertisers trade digital media within Europe far into the future. Many of these trends are shaping the industry outside Europe too, as I said. The importance of digital is clear because it accounts for a greater share of advertising activity than any other medium, including television. Internet-related media now accounts for 43% of Europe's total in 2019. It was 29% only in 2014. And in 2020, we think the figure will be 45%. Some markets are already seeing well in excess of 50% going to digital, including Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden. And for some, it's still around a third or less, including Belgium, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, and Turkey. For 2019 and 20, we forecast growth of 10 and 8%, respectively, for digital in Europe. But as digital media continues to mature, its share of spending will eventually plateau. Much of the growth of digital has been driven by the growing numbers of distinct advertisers whose spending is skewed towards digital advertising. Many newly established small businesses are more likely to operate nationally and internationally rather than on a purely domestic basis, as may have been the case over previous years. And as I said earlier, the emergence of the digital endemic companies as advertisers has really served as a massive source of growth for the industry. Mostly these are US-based, and several of them now spend more than €1 billion annually around the world on advertising. Again, heavily skewed towards digital media. We're skeptical that significant amounts of ad spending will shift into media from non-media sources, like trade promotion budgets, given the silos that still exist within large marketers. However, new sources of spending could still emerge. For all these reasons, we believe there are many reasons to be optimistic about both the current state and the future of the European digital advertising market. Thank you very much.